Welcome to episode 200 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Chris Graham, who served in the FBI for 26 years. He began his career working complex white-collar crime cases, including public corruption, healthcare fraud, telemarketing, and housing fraud. He later managed the national program for the FBI's Intellectual Property Rights Program. In this episode, Chris reviews the investigation of the long-term compromise of the McDonald's Corporation's promotional games, which utilized wiretaps, undercover operations, and detailed financial analysis. At the time of the investigation, Chris was the white-collar crime and healthcare fraud squad supervisor in the Jacksonville Field Office. The case, officially known as Operation Final Answer, is the subject of the HBO documentary McMillions. Chris Graham is prominently featured in the TV series. During his career, Chris was also a member of SWAT and deployed to the 1993 Branch Davidian siege in Waco, Texas. In the months following the tragic events of 9/11, Chris deployed to Egypt and later was chosen to open and run for 3 years the first FBI office in Milan, Italy. Upon returning to the U.S., he began to specialize in terrorism cases. His final FBI assignment was as the supervisor of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, in Jacksonville, Florida, where he returned to manage an active task force of FBI agents, investigators, police officers, and analysts from federal, state, and local agencies. Currently, Chris Graham is the vice president for security at the Macerich Company, an owner-operator of shopping complexes around the country. Chris has asked to dedicate this episode to Special Agent Melissa Morrow. You'll learn more about Melissa's ultimate sacrifice during the episode and in the show notes. I couldn't have selected a better case review to be my 200th episode. You all know how much I love talking about white-collar crime cases. It was a fun interview. Now, when I talked to Chris, I hadn't had an opportunity to watch all 6 parts of the McMillion series. I have now, but that was a good thing because it allowed us to concentrate on the investigation and not the HBO series. As part of my 200th episode celebration, I'm hosting a giveaway of cool swag and prizes, including an FBI Silhouette Target apron, FBI challenge coins, an FBI mouse pad, podcast stickers and buttons, as well as print, digital, and audiobook copies of all of my books. Everything you need to know about the giveaway will be in my May Reader Team email, which will start going out on Friday, May 1st. If you've joined my Reader Team but haven't been getting my monthly emails in your inbox, try adding Jerry Williams at jerrywilliams.com to your address book before Friday, or email me so we can figure out what the problem is. And of course, I want to welcome new listeners and invite you to join my Reader Team. This podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my monthly email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my Reader Team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, which is a colorful list of more than 50 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. And of course, this month, Reader Team members get to enter my 200th episode giveaway. You can join my Reader Team on my website or use the link in your podcast app's description of this episode. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Chris Graham. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jerry. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am so excited to do this episode because, as everybody knows, this is the type of case that I worked when I was in the Bureau. I was on an economic crime squad and I worked frauds and scams. And so I would have loved to have been on this case.
That's great. And I'm happy to be here. I love the opportunity to really tell the story a little bit. And yeah, this was one heck of a scam, to say the least.
Well, this is actually going to be fresh for me because I don't get HBO. Now, you can watch the first episode of the McMillion series on HBO that everybody's just crazy about. You can watch the first one for free, but I haven't seen the rest of the series, but I have listened to the podcast, and I'm sure there are people who didn't even know there was a McMillions podcast, so I will make sure I link it in the show notes for this episode. But I think what's so exciting for me is that both the series and the podcast, they talk about a lot of stuff, especially the victims as far as McDonald's is concerned. And then, of course, all of the subjects and the participants. And they do touch on and they do come back and forth on the actual investigation. But we're going to concentrate on the investigation. We're going to do a case review. And I don't know, you're in charge. Where do you want to start?
I think the docuseries did a really good job of telling the story, like to your point, bringing out some of the characters and getting into some of the side stories. And they got into the investigation fairly well, but like a lot of things that are primarily entertainment based, they took some creative liberties with the timing of how some things happen. I think in a chronological or linear fashion, and that's how I'll talk about the case, because I think that for people who appreciate the investigative process and how things happen and why things have to be based on other things, they'll appreciate that. So
now, you were the squad supervisor.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background about Jacksonville office and the FBI white collar program, so to speak. Jacksonville was and still is a fairly undersized office for the territory that it covered. When I got there in 2000, in May of 2000, the main office really only had 4 squads. There was a white collar crime squad, a violent crime squad, a drug squad, and a counterintelligence, so to speak, squad. And there was resident agencies, RAs as we call them, that covered most of, really geographically, most of Florida. I forget the exact numbers. Jacksonville had 47 of, I think, 65 counties in Florida, all through the Panhandle. So the division overall was really, really undersized, I think, for the workload we had. At that time, there was within the white collar crime program, there was priorities that required me as a manager to devote resources to these higher priority cases. And at the time, it was primarily public corruption and healthcare fraud, and that was mostly what we were working. I had a really neat squad. I would say diverse. We had older agents. We had some brand new agents. We had some accountants. We had a older veteran agent who had flown helicopters in Vietnam. We had a lawyer or two, and we had a few former police officers. So it made for a capable bunch. I also had 2 agents, Doug Matthews and Rick Dent, who were my healthcare fraud specialists. And Rick was I've described him as sort of the master sergeant, the senior master sergeant on the squad, who had been there a while. He was the guy that everybody went to find out really what was going on or how to get things done. Anybody you talked to in Jacksonville knew of Rick Dent. And at his side was this young Doug Matthews, who had been on the job about a year and a half. And, if you've watched McMillions, pretty enthusiastic guy. And that's how he was then and even is now. So they were working healthcare. And, from my perspective, healthcare, I had worked it earlier in my career, worked healthcare fraud cases. But by this time, by late 90s, 2000, I think some of the exciting healthcare fraud cases became less exciting. And by that, I mean, they were less blatant. I mean, I worked cases where there were no patients and they were billing under fictitious names and straw companies. The bad guys, the fraudsters in healthcare had tuned up their game a little bit and became a little more nuanced in what they were doing. And as a result, the cases, I think, became longer, more difficult. And if you hear Doug Matthews talk about it, boring. So that sort of sets the stage for where we were at in the end of 2000, first couple of weeks of 2001, when we got this information, this tip from an informant that Rick Dent and Doug knew, that alleged something pretty incredible. And basically that information was that the McDonald's, the promotional the promotional games for McDonald's had been compromised. And not a whole lot of detailed information, but
How was it, a written tip or was it a call-in?
no, it was a call in. It was an established informant that brought it. It was more than just a phone in tip, and because I know Rick and Doug spent time with this person after to get additional information as they could and asked follow-up questions. So this information came in, and quite frankly, it was shocking. I thought it seemed a little far-fetched, but there were some notable specifics that you don't always get. I had to make a decision about whether to pull these guys away from healthcare fraud, high priority, and let them run this down. I think the decision was not a difficult decision based on what we know now to be true. But even at the time, had that been true and we ignored it, it would have been a big mistake. So I turned them loose. The informant information basically said that there was this guy named Jerry Colombo who was married to a Robin Colombo, and Jerry Colombo was getting winning game pieces from somebody named Dominic, and Jerry Colombo was tasked to find winners. And this same Jerry Colombo, this is in around 1996, had won a Dodge Viper automobile through McDonald's. It's worth about $65,000 back then. And that somewhere along the way, this Dominic had died, and that somehow this Jerry Colombo was put in touch with somebody named Uncle Jerry, who was allegedly the person behind the tickets. The information from the informant was that this Uncle Jerry was a former FBI agent, which...
Whoa, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. And it's, we see at the end that it not quite that true, but there was some validity to it. That of course got our attention. And all along these winners, these alleged winners, the people who were recruited to claim prizes, had to kick up portions of their winnings back up the chain to Jerry Colombo and then on to Uncle Jerry. So that was the initial gist of the information. But let me just for the listeners, just give a little side note on McDonald's games and really how they worked. I think most people know this, but it's worth mentioning. The games for McDonald's were a huge source of revenue. When they ran games, their revenue spiked, almost direct correlation to when they ran the games. Usually the games were based on Monopoly. Everybody remembers, I've got to get the boardwalk piece or some other piece to complete the board. But they would occasionally divert off of that and go with different themes, the USA Olympics at the time. And then, of course, the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire TV show became the theme of one of their games in early 2001. They would run both high value prizes and routine low value prizes. And the high value prizes were typically $1 million or a high value car, houses, vacation, and generally things worth an amount of money that you'd have to claim on your income taxes.
Could you give us a little bit more detail about where and how, you could win these prizes?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. So it could be anything from you could walk into McDonald's and buy a box of fries and peel off the bottom and be an instant winner of $1 million. So the prizes would be distributed onto McDonald's products, usually cardboard drinks or French fry boxes, things that the piece could be affixed to, or the pieces could be distributed through often magazines. So there might be an insert with a magazine with a free piece. So those were how they distributed almost all the pieces, really, both the high value pieces and the other pieces. Some of them were instant winners. Some of them you had to, again, collect spots on the Monopoly board. I would point out, I think a lot of people misunderstand that $1 million winner doesn't mean you get $1 million. It's the way it's structured is it's $50,000 a year for 20 years. So you could take your $50,000 every year, or you could ask for a lump sum, which, if I remember correctly, equated to somewhere around $470,000. But in either case, you're on the hook for taxes. So a $1 million piece that was taken as a lump sum would be let's say $465, but then taxes are taken out, and the taxes could be another couple of $100,000. So the actual bounty, let's say, to split up among the pirates in this game was less than $1 million. So,
all right, so nobody was set for life.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. And early on we assumed incorrectly that this game process, the structure of the game, the printing, everything was done within a department in McDonald's. That's not knowing how that business worked. None of us had. I think a few of us may have worked at McDonald's at the fry counter, but nobody really had that kind of inside information. And we ultimately learned that it was more complicated than that, fortunately. So back to the informant. So I mentioned the basic things that the person provided. They also provided some other information that was really pretty important. They talked about a winner named Buddy Fisher, who turned out, and this was according to the informant, was Robin Fisher's father. They mentioned a person named Stacy Briegel, who the informant claimed was a winner, said that was Robin's brother-in-law, a couple of other names, and a person named Gloria Brown, who was also allegedly a winner. Didn't really get into how Gloria Brown fit into this, but just the familial connections were enough to be of concern.
Robin Fisher, that was Robin Colombo that you had mentioned?
Yes,
okay.
yes, correct. Robin Colombo. Robin Colombo was married to Jerry Colombo, and her maiden name was Fisher. So Buddy Fisher was her biological father. And then the informant said that Jerry Colombo had died in a car crash, and that now Robin was dealing directly with this alleged, or this mysterious Uncle Jerry. And that unfortunately now Robin was in jail. So that was, I think, pretty specific information, but again, not anywhere close to what we ultimately needed to nail down.
Well, I guess as you're hearing about these people who have been winners of the McDonald's game, you're saying to yourself, this can't be a coincidence that all of these people are related.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And at this point, we have an informant telling us these people are related and telling us that they are winners, but that's just words from an informant. That we needed to verify that. I mean, how many times do we get information that turns out to be just a misunderstanding, or somebody's got an axe to grind and they want to cause somebody some problems, so they dream up some information. So we took it on face value, took it with a grain of salt, and then proceeded down a couple of different tracks. And by this time we're into March of 2001. One track obviously was to verify and determine everything we could about these folks on our own. And right away, some of this became true. But at some point, we needed help from McDonald's. And, to my point earlier that we thought incorrectly that McDonald's really had complete control over this game, that was a tough decision about whether to reach out to McDonald's. We had some squad deliberations with the prosecutor, Mark Devereaux, who got on board very early with this case about the risks and benefits of going to McDonald's. And was there somebody who we thought we could reach out to McDonald's that we trusted? And one of the names that came up was their head of security. And like a lot of decisions, there's no obvious right or wrong one. It's a 52-48% proposition. And we decided to reach out to McDonald's and reach out to Rob Holm and some other folks, and learned pretty quickly that the game was contracted out. The promotion, the printing was contracted out from McDonald's to a company called Simon Marketing. And really that was almost the extent McDonald's knew of it until something that comes up later on with when we started digging into it. So that, in a way, that was a little bit of a relief. We were at least somewhat confident that we had made the right decision. But more importantly, we started getting lists of winners from McDonald's. And, we held back some of the throughout we held back information from McDonald's until, a point came later on where, we had to tell them everything. But we started getting lists of winners. And really what the significance of that was, this list of winners, some of these winners confirmed that names provided by the informant, Buddy Fisher, Stacy Briegel, Gloria Brown, Jerry Colombo, there was another one named Joe Carl, were in fact winners. Wow, now this is starting to really firm up. These lists from McDonald's provided specifics about the dates and places that these winners claimed to live and the dates they did it. And it added a few other names as well.
Did they live all over the country, or were they all living right where Robin and Jerry Colombo lived?
Well, Buddy Fisher claimed to have one in New Hampshire, and we had already done some due diligence on him, and turned out he lived in Florida, lived in Jacksonville. Gloria Brown, same thing. She claimed to have one in South Carolina. Stacy Briegel happened to be up in Maryland, up in Frederick, Maryland, but we were able to show some connection to Robin Colombo with him. So I mean, this again rapidly is becoming even more real than we initially thought. So I won't get into each and every person, but we picked sort of, I would call it the low hanging fruit to dig into a little further. Buddy Fisher, as I mentioned, claimed to have won the game in New Hampshire, and he claimed to have won $1 million. He actually got the 50,000s several times from a prize piece in June of 1999. We got canceled checks from McDonald's, showed that Fisher lived in Jacksonville. This was a time when people made phone calls on house phones, or the early days of cell phones, and all those phone records, or these toll records, were kept, and you could issue a subpoena to the phone company and get somebody's phone records. And lo and behold, we got his phone records, and you see him calling numbers in New Hampshire and then calling in the winning piece. Same thing, same pattern with Gloria Brown. Claimed to have one in South Carolina. We did the same. In her case was interesting. The bank records, we see for the first time that she got 50,000 and right away had to withdraw 40,000. And we believed at the time and know now that was money to be kicked up to the various Jerrys involved in the scam. One of the other things that really sort of tied this together, as I mentioned, the informant told us that Robin was in jail. So we went out and got visitor lists and logs for Robin for her visitor list at the prison in Lowell. And lo and behold, who shows up but Gloria Brown. So this is really, really starting to tighten up.
Are you going to tell us why Robin was in jail?
Just get a list of various every fraud statute in Florida, and and I can't even remember the number of arrests and convictions. She had quite a few. I think it was it's some sort of insurance fraud, a stolen car, insurance claim of some such thing like that. But I might be wrong. A lot of this really, and I mentioned it earlier, the producers who did the documentary really went into a lot of detail on a lot of things that, frankly, were not high priority things for us. And as a fraud investigator and FBI agent your whole career, that often it's, what do we have to do to prove the elements of this crime? And then you focus on those and try to avoid going down rabbit trails that take up your limited time. So
I take it you've watched the series?
Oh yeah.
Would you say that you learned things that you didn't even know?
Well, I learned that I look and sound a lot different on camera than I envision in my mind. So that would be the first most sobering thing. Yeah. Well, I learned stuff from the series, and really a lot of it learned a little bit along the way too, in staying in contact with and working with the producers. But there were things that they held out, and again, they did I think, in my humble opinion, a really good job of developing characters and telling their story. That kind of stuff doesn't get into an FBI case file. So I think they, the case itself and what we're talking about now complement that and the series hopefully complement one another.
Did you want to tell us about that first meeting with McDonald's?
Yeah, well, let me, so we're into March, and I wouldn't say the trail seemed to grow cold, but we were kind of at an impasse. We believed and knew or fully suspected that the scam, was still going. So we had been told that McDonald's had subcontracted the promotion, the running of the games, the placement to Simon Marketing. And one of the first things we did is we essentially asked McDonald's to dig into that a little more. And they did. They went out to Simon Marketing under the auspices of a type of an internal control audit. Again, risky, but you've got to take some chances. And Rob Holm came back with a lot of information. The most important one was a person named Jerry Jacobson was the main security guy there, and he was integrally involved in the printing, placement, and security of these pieces. We also hear at the time, at least from people at Simon to Rob through us, that Jerry Jacobson was again former law enforcement of some sort. And I can't remember if it was, again, FBI or somebody else, but that caused us some interest. I will say we took that name and immediately ran it through FBI headquarters, and I'm happy to say, and was happy then, that he was never an FBI agent. So
Yay.
That would have been tough.
Let me ask you a quick question, because I know as a former economic fraud investigator, when the quote unquote victim was a corporation, there were times when they really didn't want us working the case. They wanted to take care of it in some other way, or they were reluctant because of marketing, that it would hurt their brand. There must have been some relief for them that it wasn't McDonald's that was doing this fraud. It was someone at Simon Marketing. But did you have any pushback from them at all?
I wouldn't call it pushback. And yeah, I think initially there was relief that it was Simon Marketing, or it appeared to be. I think, that relief was quickly subsumed by the looking forward concern of how this is going to the public relations disaster for McDonald's. We never got pushback per se. At one point, and I'll get into this, a little later, we really had to sit down with them and lay a little more cards on the table and talk about, hey, we need more hands-on proactive cooperation from you, to include continuing to run a game. And I thought, well, that should be an easy decision for them. They could probably decide right here and now at the table. We had a conference, we had a Malta conference room, and the Jacksonville office, several of their executives, and we laid out our case and our requests. And I think we were even a little surprised that they said, well, we've got to go back and consider this consider it. I know now, knowing, having been in the corporate side a little bit, I can definitely sense that was a tough decision for them. And I'm sure there were some rather involved deliberations within McDonald's about whether to continue to participate or hope this thing somehow goes away. But I think in a way they were in a little bit of a trick bag, because it would never go away. I mean, it may have taken us a lot longer, but with as many winners are involved, with just going with a historical case and evidence and records, and somewhere along the way, somebody's gonna crack and look out for their own interests. So I think they realized that, and more importantly, I think they had a former assistant U.S. attorney somewhere involved in their legal staff, and Rob Holm was a security guy. Our requests were reasonable and made, investigatively made sense. They knew what we had to do to prove the case and why we were asking for the games to continue. So I think that maybe answers your question. So at the end of the day, they were phenomenal partners, and even still through the McMillion's program, they obviously participated in that as well. So yeah, interesting time.
Very interesting. And I don't even know. This is strange that I don't know this, and you might be getting to it at the end, and I'm jumping ahead of time. But do they still run that game?
They started it again, and it was several years after, and I couldn't, you get older and all the years kind of run together. Obviously, and I'll get into it at the end, why this case sort of immediately became less important to everybody in the country. But several years passed, and they ran it again. And coincidentally, there's a grocery store chain now that's running a Monopoly game.
Oh yeah, I've got my pieces downstairs. Seriously, yeah.
Oh yeah.
The Acme in New Jersey runs it all the time. So yeah.
Yeah. I've got a drawer full of pieces. I was at a grocery store and they were giving the pieces out, and somebody started talking about the McDonald's case, and he said, I don't want any of these pieces. They're probably fixed, just like the McDonald's one. I just kind of chuckled.
You chuckled to yourself.
Walked away.
If they only knew.
Yeah. So no, that was a great question about McDonald's, and as we get into kind of the later phases, you'll see just how involved they ended up being. So we really sort of reached a point. Well, I wouldn't call this a real crossroads, but we got to the point where, okay, we know Jerry Jacobson, he's probably the guy, and we've got all these winners around more and more. They all seem to have, in some way, shape, or form, some connections, some not. But the obvious question is how do we connect them? I had spent a couple of years early in my career working drug cases, and one of the techniques that was used was to tie in street level dealers to people up the chain as you look for common numbers called. So who are they? Is Jerry Jacobson calling phone numbers that are also called or contacted by winners? And sounds easy. You start getting reams and reams of phone records, and I think in the TV show they've got us poring over these dot matrix printouts of phone numbers. Jerry, you probably remember it wasn't state of the art, but there was this thing called telephone application in the FBI that had put together, and that actually did a pretty good job of taking intake of bulk phone records. Yes. and finding these common numbers, and that once we got Jerry's records and some others. So but we still had to input those to
in order to. Don't
Yeah.
forget that there was
Oh,
still
yeah.
some manual labor.
Oh yeah, there's some unsung heroes in this case, and I'll get into them later for sure. It was pretty onerous. So we're into April of 2001 now. We've started to get phone records. We're starting to analyze those, and McDonald's tells us that a guy named Ronald Huey had won $1 million, claimed to win, or filed a claim for $1 million winner at the end of April 2001. He claimed to have won it from Tennessee. Turns out public records show he lives in South Carolina. So we figured, well, let's get this guy's phone records. We also did what we call trap and trace pen register on his phone. And now remembering that we have Jerry Jacobson phone records and we have trap and trace on his phone, combination of trap and trace and pen is the current calls, and the toll records are the calls that have already happened in the past. And lo and behold, we have our first, what I call middleman or recruiter, jumps out of the phone records, because they're both calling somebody named Dwight Baker, who coincidentally is also in South Carolina. So we now have identified a current recruiter. We start comparing other winners to who is Dwight Baker call. We identified a guy named George Chandler had won in 2000. Coincidentally, he also lived in South Carolina. So again, these things are really kind of falling in place. A month later, somebody named Brenda Phoenix wins a $500,000 prize, which was a really an oddity, because it was $500,000 up front. She claims to have won it from a spot in North Carolina. We go check public records. What do you know? It turns out the public records associate her with Baker's address, the very same address. Turns out she's Dwight Baker's wife, Linda. That's her sister. So all these people, Jerry Jacobson, Ronald Huey, Dwight Baker, Dwight Linda Baker, Brenda Phoenix, George Chandler, all, if you put them on a map, they're all within 40, 50 miles of each other. So
what a coincidence.
Yeah, what a coincidence. That's what this should be called. It should be called Operation Coincidence, because there was more of this. I think early on, Mark Devereaux had run some statistics about the possibility of winning the game just completely independent, and then the possibility of two relatives winning the game, and then the possibility of three relatives winning the game. And it was, he ran out of zeros. I mean, in Mark's typical fashion, he was doing it on a whiteboard, and I think he got to the bottom and wanted to start writing on the wall. So that's where we were at. And, on the surface, one would think that we've got this case nailed down, that we've got a really good circumstantial case. But if you think about it, we're missing two elements here. We need to show that Jerry Jacobson is the guy behind this, that he's stealing the pieces or whatever he's doing to get them to these winners. And then we've got to also, to the extent possible, show that these winners know that something is wrong about how they are getting these pieces and then claiming to have won them. So when a winner wins a piece, they call a number, and there's some controls on the piece and some serial numbers, but they also at some point have to at least tell in summary fashion somebody at McDonald's where they won it and how. So, and I'm just, not sure this is exactly accurate, but let's say Ron Huey claims to win it in Tennessee. Well, he's got to give them a Tennessee address, maybe even a Tennessee driver's license, try to establish quick residence there, and then say, and I won it off a French fry box in Tennessee, because we find out later that Jacobson was given a region or a state to place the pieces. So the winners had to match up with that, because if McDonald's said, the piece needs to be placed in the Southwest U.S. and somebody's calling from New Jersey and saying they want it at the McDonald's on the Jersey Turnpike, that doesn't that rings bells. So they were careful to cover their tracks.
And that explained why somebody living in Florida claims that they live in New Hampshire.
Exactly.
Ah.
And if 3 or 4 people are calling, are claiming to win from the same zip code in Florida, I mean, McDonald's is gonna catch that. So this is where we're now really the end of May, mid-May, end of May of 2001, and this is when we enter what I call the proactive phase of the case. We need to catch Jacobson, the Bakers, anybody else in the act. Really, the only way really to do that is, well, you can surveil them with physical surveillance, and that's going to maybe show people meeting, but it's not going to catch the conversations, and it's not going to capture the evidence that shows guilty knowledge or intent. By this time, we had I think very strong probable cause, and we had an excellent handle on all the phone numbers and the players we knew that far. Good background information. We had really good background information on the games from McDonald's, how it worked. So the decision was made, sort of an obvious decision, is, hey, we have got to go up on a Title III wiretap, which is, as you know, Jerry, much easier said than done. If you watch TV, it seems like, we just walk into a room and flip on switches, or a van pulls up outside somebody's house and they put alligator clips on the phone and they will listen away. And
they forget about all the court authorization that's needed.
Oh yeah, it's monumental. And that said, Title IIIs are usually done in drug cases or organized crime cases. That's what we usually see. Not in white collar cases, and not in white collar cases that have existing records and witnesses and the ability to call people in front of the grand jury. So the drug cases, the organized crime cases in a Title III, that's usually what DOJ, the Department of Justice, and judges are used to seeing. So to go down this road, we anticipated, and correctly so, that it would take a little more pushing the case over the line to get it up and running. That was the point where I mentioned earlier that we needed to sit down with McDonald's and ask them to continue to run a game. They had a game scheduled. It was a Monopoly game scheduled to start on July 7th, I believe, 2001. So into the summer. In June was when the grueling, painstaking process of writing the affidavit, the application in support of the Title III was being done over probably a couple of weeks. Rick Dent was one of the main authors, along with our Chief Division Counsel, Mike Perkins, and a few others.
I know Michael Perkins.
Oh, yeah.
He was in my new agent training class with me.
Mike's one of these people that the enthusiasm, the energy, the honesty, the integrity.
Yeah, he was an Energizer bunny in our new agents class. And I know this is probably not what a man wants to hear, but he's just a sweet guy.
He really is. And if somebody said to me, who is a person on earth you would most want to emulate in the way you carry yourself and your morals and everything. And for me, it was always Mike Perkins. Yeah. So, we get into this phase of writing, and it ended up being, 61, 62 page long affidavit to justify the Title III. At this point, and I mentioned the size of the Jacksonville office, really only 4 squads. So,
I do need to just jump in and just let people know that is small. I mean, an office like the size of Philadelphia probably has, I'm guessing, 15 or so squads. I know I was on squad 9. So to have 4 squads, and Jacksonville, Tampa, and Miami cover Florida.
Yeah. And again, Tampa covered Orlando. So Jacksonville covered pretty much everything north of Orlando, to include Ocala, Daytona Beach, and then the entire Panhandle. And up until the mid 90s, was very rural. There was an explosion of growth in Northeast Florida in the late 90s and continues even to today. And of course, now the division's grown dramatically. But like a lot of things in the Bureau, they're behind the curve on things like that. So yeah, it was a small office, and as we were ramping up for this, effectively the whole office became involved. Even the SAC, Tom Kinnear, and the ASAC, W.K. Williams, who were both really experienced criminal investigators. They knew what was involved in a case like this and recognized it. So they not only supported it completely, they were integrally involved in getting this done. We saw that throughout the whole summer.
Can you talk about the manpower commitment to operating a Title III, especially in a small office like Jacksonville?
Yeah. So, well, a couple of things. We went up on three phone lines, two of which were for the Bakers and one of which was for Jacobson. Those lines, those phone lines, have to be monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what that means is each line has an agent who is sitting there. When the phone rings, they hit the tape recorders, and this was at a time where we were still using a deck of three cassette tape recorders. They record three separate copies, hit the record button, and then they start listening. And if the conversation is not at all relevant, after a certain period of time, they would turn it off, wait a designated period of time, turn it back on, and again listen to see if the conversation has changed to the illicit conduct. It's somewhat subjective. I mean, there's obviously minimization rules that people have to follow, but it is in a way a little bit of an art form. In addition, there's logs and summaries that have to be kept of these minimizations. So somebody turns off the tape, they've got to enter on the log minimized, turn it back on at this time, conversation about groceries, boom, minimized. That all takes time. The tape, if is finished or their shift is finished, those tapes have to be sealed and summarized. So just even in terms of the monitoring room, which was a dedicated room with 3-4 people sitting around, that's all they did. That's one part of it. And then right next door is sort of the command post, the operations room that was staffed with Rick Dent and myself sometimes, most of the time. And Doug Astrologa is also involved, and others.
Hey, Doug Astrologa, I know him too, because he was in Philly for a while.
Yeah.
So this is pretty cool. There's a lot of connections.
the Jacksonville web. Good. Yeah, so we would have to do 10-day reports to the court on the progress. And no sooner are you up on a Title III, because it only lasts for 30 days. You get into day 5, day 8, day 10, you've got to start thinking about your renewal for the next 30 days. So it is just mind-boggling.
Can we take the time to, I don't want this to be like a tutorial or a class, but just the preparation. How do you prepare and prove to the court that this is necessary?
Yeah.
Because it's very invasive.
Yeah, that's a great question. And invasive is the operative term, that it is considered among, if not one of the most invasive investigative techniques. And the courts are protective of that, as they should be. The long and short of it is you have to, and I'm not a lawyer, nor do I pretend to be, but the long and short of it is you have to show really a couple of things, but the one that jumps out is that these telephones, the phones themselves, that they are being used in furtherance of an ongoing crime, that the conversations on that phone have to be searched like you would search a house, but specifically tying in those phones being used to further the crime, and not just the phones, but the owners of the phones. So that's really the first part. You've got to show why you are effectively doing this intrusive search of conversations between two parties who don't know they are being listened to. One. Number two, that there is no other way to get this information or no reasonable other investigative technique that you can use to get this. So, in our case, we needed to show guilty knowledge of the theft and placement of these pieces and the details of how it was being done. That could only be gathered proactively on these phone calls. I mean, some could say, well, you can go later on, you can just go interview these people. Well, maybe that works, but maybe they just lawyer up and what do? You've got to go to trial with a lack of evidence. No smart prosecutor is going to do that.
Before you tell us, what fruit you came out of the recordings, you got to let me know what the code name was for this case, because we mentioned Operation Coincidence, but I doubt if that was really the code name.
I'm so glad you reminded me of that, and thought to ask me that question, because it wasn't on my list of stuff. And there's actually a kind of a funny, little inside story. So I mentioned you had all these people sitting around the wire room doing the monitoring, and a lot of times there just wasn't any phone calls late at night, in the morning. So you've got agents doing they're reading books, they're doing crossword puzzles, but mostly as agents do, they're commiserating, they're arguing, they're debating, they're doing these things. We decided we needed to have a name for the operation. If I recall, the way headquarters, if you just left it up to headquarters, they had this system or something that would just pick an adjective and a noun and stick them together, and you'd get something. You get tangerine tiger or something like that really didn't make any sense. So I decided to run a contest for the game names, and I, up until recently, I had the sheet where people would enter the names. And, there were some pretty funny ones.
And these were people in the office, agents in the office, or employees in the office?
Yeah. The agents.
That's a unique way of doing it.
Yeah. Well, and, you can imagine some of the things you get. You got, I think we got Jerry's Kids, and we got Operation Hamburglar, and a few others. My personal favorite was Operation Unhappy Meal. But that didn't, we figured, we had to be respectful of McDonald's. So at the time, there was the TV show that I think Regis Philbin ran, and it was called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And at the end, he would say to the contestant, "Is that your final answer?" Well, McDonald's was running the game Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? So Operation Final Answer just seemed to make the most sense, and didn't ruffle any feathers, I hope. So,
nice, very nice.
Yeah, so we, get back to the wire. Right away we began intercepting incriminating calls. A guy named A.J. Glum came up pretty quickly, and was, in his conversations with Jacobson, where, he was identified as another sort of middleman recruiter that will come into play a little later when we get into some of the undercover work. I would point out that, in addition to all the stuff that was going on the Title III, the monitoring, the other stuff, there were agents and mostly analysts continuing to pull together information through phone records, through public sources, checking FBI records, and putting together almost daily link charts where every day the names, this web with Jacobson in the middle and these recruiters off out to the side, and then off the recruiters would be the winners. Every day it got bigger and bigger, more names, and it went further back. And again, those folks were the unsung heroes of this case. The other thing that was going on at the time, speaking of unsung heroes, was remember at this point most of the historical winners were in Jacksonville, and that was years ago. The current things that were going on were Jerry Jacobson in Atlanta and all these folks in South Carolina, including the Bakers. So you had the Atlanta division and the Columbia divisions constantly busy with surveillance and other workup on on the folks in their territory. So, I just want to, I want to make sure the listeners know that it may seem from, the TV show or even listening to me that this was the three or four of us pulled this whole thing together, and the folks behind the scene, some of the analysts, Kimberly Henderson, Kyle Stevens, Nancy Hopkins. We mentioned Mike Perkins, the pilots. I mean, there was a pilot who observed Jerry meeting Dwight Baker in a parking lot, and we'll maybe get into that. Witnessed the passing of the envelope from the plane. I mean, these are folks who each of them contributed important pieces to this puzzle of a case, and I want to make sure the listeners know and understand that that's one of the things that makes really the FBI unique as a law enforcement agency, is that ability to have everybody in different places working from the same playbook and understanding what the plays are and doing it at the most professional level with enthusiasm. And that was, that's probably my final word at the end, and I'll repeat it at the end, but that's really the one thing that jumped out. Would have been a caveat in there that this case is I wouldn't say the word secret like the way we know secret and classification of cases, but highly, highly sensitive. And we had told McDonald's that we would keep it that way. And we even told, and I told people on the squad and in the office, and the SAC did as well. And when we sent leads to other offices, this is close hold. You do not tell, you don't tell your spouse, you don't tell anybody outside of it who has a direct need to know. That was a promise that we made to McDonald's, and it was a promise that we absolutely needed to keep. Throughout that summer, I was working late every night, and my wife, my kids, my friends, they noticed that and knew something was up, but I couldn't and wouldn't tell them, and didn't until the takedown happened. So anyway, back to the kind of the wire part. So, in August by August we had gone up on the telephone line. We'd renewed the Title III. We had added a fourth line for AJ Glum. At this point, we started thinking longer term about, okay, how are we going to, we've got all these people now who are on the wire, but there's a whole lot of other people who 1 year ago, not on the wire. Maybe we connect them through phone records, but some not so much. We've got to figure out a way to have them retell their story, because McDonald's, when they would call in and give their information, really McDonald's took them at face value and didn't record it, didn't keep sufficient records about what they were saying. So we needed to kind of lock them in their story. I mean, they could, if we didn't do that, they could step up later on and say, yeah, of course, I told McDonald's that I bought it from Dwight Baker, or some other half truth. May not have got him completely out of the woods, but it would really have complicated the case and possibly submarine, our plan to charge them. So that's really where the idea. This is where we even ramped up the proactive part into the infamous undercover operation, which we call the reunion of winners. And I will give Doug Matthews credit for the idea that we thought, okay, everybody's won these prizes. They agree in some way, shape, or form to participate in publicity. And why not come up with this idea that let's have a reunion of winners, all expense paid, in Las Vegas. And we'll invite them all out to Las Vegas and put them up in nice places, and they can party and have a good time on McDonald's to retell their story. Well, of course, we never intended to do that. What we did intend to do was, in preparation for the reunion of winners, was get out and create an undercover production company and film them, choice winners, film them retelling the story of how they won. And the pitch was, your story, this video that we're taking of you, will be put on the big screen in the conference room in Vegas, and everybody will cheer and you'll be a star. So tell us how you won it.
Oh, I like that. It's kind of like with American Idol, where they go back and tell you a little bit about the person's family life and their struggles to become known and things like that. Great idea, Doug.
Yeah, yeah, it was one of his good ones. Yeah, he had a few. So we created a undercover production company. We got a videographer from FBI Quantico to participate in the team. We got Doug Matthews to be the quote unquote director producer. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the participation by McDonald's. This was something that I think by this time they had confidence in us. We had a good working relationship with them. We had always told them we will do everything we can to protect your interests, to keep your make it well known your cooperation and your role as a quote unquote victim in this. So by that time, in the context of doing the undercover production company, we recruited Amy Murray, who was on Rob Holmes' staff, to go out as part of the undercover team and film these winners for the reunion of winners. And Amy just did a fantastic job. She was just a natural at it, and more important, she knew the buzzwords and the things that McDonald's would want if theoretically they were going to do this game. We had two sort of nicknames for this. Obviously, the first was Operation Final Answer for the operation. But when you do an undercover, particularly a production company, well, that production company has to have a name. And I don't recall who came up with the name per se, but the name was Shamrock Productions. But the thing I just loved about it, and I want to say this was Mark Devereaux and Doug Matthews, their byline was Shamrock Productions, quote, because you are just lucky, end quote, which just
I like that.
I think really poked a little fun at the whole crew.
Yeah. You're so lucky. Look at you,
Yeah,
lucky winner.
because
Yeah,
you're just
little sarcasm there.
Yep, just lucky. So we did three or four of those, and they all went phenomenal. One of the things, and I'll get into momentarily the takedown, the timing, and kind of a few of the things that happened there, but we got to the point where we had intercepted phone calls indicated, this is towards somewhat toward the end, that we had indicated, and this was for the game they were running, that one of the big pieces was going to be passed off from Jacobson to Dwight Baker. We heard that on a phone call, and the commentary or the conversation was, let's meet at the usual place. And I'm paraphrasing because obviously no one's listened to the tapes, but let's meet at the usual place, along the highway, the French place, and in about an hour. So, wow, good grief. We've got an hour to get surveillance teams out there to figure out where this is. We don't even know where it is. We got out a map. We figured out where Dwight lived, where Jerry lived, figured I-85 was in the middle. We started looking. What do you know, about halfway, there's a big golf resort called the Chateau Elan. Sounds kind of French to me. And we, again, on the phone with Atlanta, who was fantastic, told them what we had heard, what we thought, and they were able to capture on surveillance, both from the ground and the air, the meeting of Jerry Jacobson and Dwight Baker in the parking lot.
Why were they being so cryptic on the phone? Did they suspect that they were being listened to?
That's a good question, and they did not. They were always a little cryptic, and I think that was just Jacobson's prior law enforcement. He had been a police officer in South Florida. He went out on a disability, and I think that was just his their way of being sneaky. So, I mean, clearly, if they knew they were being listened to, they would have been even a little more careful than that. So anyway, we followed the phone traffic, the phone calls from Dwight Baker, and then on to a prior winner named Ron Huey, and then to the final winner was a guy named John Davis out in Texas, and we were able to tell McDonald's, or at least suggest to them, you're probably going to get a call from a guy named John Davis claiming to be a winner. And within a day or two, that's what happened. So we knew the winner before McDonald's did in the last
All right.
game piece.
I have so many questions. And one of the questions is, how much did you share with McDonald's during the investigation? I mean, right then, you had to let them know that they were going to get this call to prepare them and also to be able to record it, I take it. But how much more, as you're going through this investigation, were you sharing with them, if anything?
They were respectful of our need to not, not divulge too much. Certainly we couldn't divulge what was being said on the wiretap. Whether they knew there was a wiretap or not, I don't know. I mean, they were smart, and whether we told them or not, I don't think we did, but it was one of these unspoken things. They knew it. They certainly knew what was going on with the undercover operations, because it was their employee who participated. So again, there was a degree of trust that was developed over time, I think, on both sides. So we're at the end of, we're getting into the middle of August. McDonald's is not going to run another game for us. So the clock, so to speak, is up. It's time to take this thing down. And the takedown, let's say the initial series of arrests of 8 people combined with dozens of interviews was scheduled for August 21st, 2001. The communication that was prepared, that went out to, I want to say it was 15 field offices across the country, mostly in the East, with complete summary detail of the investigation. Some of these offices already knew a lot of it because they had worked on it throughout the summer, but written detail, interview packages, evidence packages to do, I want to say it was 22, 23 separate interviews in addition to the arrests. That document was called an EC, electronic communication, which at the time was mostly electronic, but not completely. So one of the things that happened, and I'll kind of jump a little side note into Murphy's Law, and I'll tell you why it ties into what I just mentioned about ECs and communications. This lengthy EC that was 25, 30 pages long was sent to, and I won't name the field office, and I won't name the any of the people involved, but it was sent to a headquarters or a field office, so big city, who then needed to convey it to one of their satellite offices. That at the time needed to be done by fax. That EC was put on a fax machine, and somebody hit a speed dial, and instead of going to that satellite office, that RA, that resident agency, it went to the local newspaper.
What?
Yes. Yes. And
okay.
Yeah. And fortunately, the newspaper did the right thing. As soon as they got it, they called us. They said, "We don't think we're supposed to get this." The SAC and Mark Devereaux flew up there, met with them. We agreed to everything we could agree to make sure they were included in whatever media came out of this thing. And they, thankfully for us, they did the right thing. Now, that was not the first time we had a problem with the fax. I'm going to rewind a little bit to July 5th. I had mentioned that the game, the Title III and the game were supposed to start and did start on July 7th. We finished the affidavit and got the actual order around July 2nd or July 3rd. On July 5th, that T3, that Title III order, was faxed to a small cell phone company in Atlanta, which had the coverage of Jacobson's phone. We got a call from the CEO of that company and said, "I just got this. I don't know if you know this or not, but Jerry Jacobson's wife works here. She is, I think she was his admin assistant or somebody who would normally receive that fax. She just happened to be out today, and they brought this to me."
Wow.
Yeah. So we dodged that. That was the first bullet. That was strike one. We had the fax that went to the local newspaper, strike two. And now we're facing a takedown. And what I say, people always ask, like, wow, that's Murphy's Law. It's, if something's going to go wrong, it will go wrong. I would say this: if you have a big case like this, and things like this don't come to your attention, all it means is that something like that has happened, and you don't know it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
and you're trying to figure out why no one is talking on these phone lines anymore.
Yeah.
Or, so you know what
all of a sudden
you know
it
what
just got
about.
quiet. It just dried up. And you never know.
That's right. What could have gone wrong? Oh, and you start blaming each other, and somebody leaked this, and So anyway, so that was the.
I'm fascinated by this because, again, this is the kind of case that I worked when, I was in the FBI, and I am just fascinated about all the things that people do, to steal money and the greed and all of that. This newspaper that got this fax about the takedown, did they send out a reporter or two to try to cover the arrest?
Yeah, I won't get into the nuances of what we agreed to do, but yeah, they were it was pretty big news, and there was so there was the takedown, right? So the takedown happened as planned on August 21st in the morning. We had sent Jacksonville agents all over the country to team up with field office agents, and there was a sequence of arrests and interviews, and we had a command post set up in Jacksonville to gather and coordinate and collaborate the incoming information, who had been arrested, who had confessed, who had not, blah, 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 blah. The arrests that were, within that newspaper's area of coverage, and everybody will quickly figure this out when they watch the TV show. That was big news there, and they were on the spot to report it pretty quickly. But there was also, concurrent with the takedown on the day of and the day before, the SAC, Tom Kinnear, joined the acting FBI director at the time, which was Tom Picard, with the Attorney General Ashcroft at the time, for a national press conference in DC that went out over the national media. I want to say midday on the 21st, or maybe even earlier than that. So every media outlet in the country picked up on it. So let's take ourselves back to that time. The first indictment of the 8, the actual return of the indictment on the first 8, they were initially charged by criminal complaint. The indictment was, I believe, September 10th, with arraignment the next morning, September 11th. And we know what happened on September 11th. Everything completely changed the world for really everybody, and that. For many people, maybe you included, you may remember it, but it got overwhelmed and subsumed with what everybody else had to deal with. In our case, within hours, all the people who were working on this case were immediately redeployed to address the chaos and the panic, the issue of what was going on at 9/11 in those early days. I'm sure you remember it. I remember it like it was yesterday. And McDonald's and Final Answer became an afterthought, except for 3 people who were left to carry on. The case agent, Rick Dent, Doug Matthews. There were some analysts who had to stick by, and Mark Devereaux, the prosecutor. So, through the fall and into the spring, they continued with the trial prep, the indictment. They did, I think, a couple of superseding indictments, ultimately charging over 50 people in the whole case, which included obviously Jacobson. It included a number of recruiters in the middle, and all kinds of winners, and winners over a certain amount. Most of those winners, and a lot of people throughout the case, but most of the winners, we certainly didn't want to have a trial with 50 defendants, and thankfully most of them confessed right away, did whatever they could to pay back what they had, agree to testify. So it made the task a lot easier. Jerry Jacobson pled guilty, as did the recruiters, Baker, Ronald Huey, Andrew Glum. So nevertheless, they Doug, Rick, and Mark were still we're still left with a trial that went into the spring. I think there was maybe 6 or so that went to trial, including George Chandler, who I mentioned earlier. He hired a former assistant U.S. attorney by the name of Curtis Fallgetter to defend him. And, to say that the trial and the relationship between Mark Devereaux and Curtis Fallgetter was contentious would be an understatement.
Had they worked together at the U.S. Attorney's Office? Yeah,
and there was a backstory to Curtis and to Mark's relationship. I think Curtis might have even hired Mark, and if you talk to and meet Mark or see him on TV, you can see he is a type A, strong-willed prosecutor. He's exactly the kind of prosecutor you want to do a white collar case, and he's really sharp and funny but driven. And you put two alpha males in a courtroom together, watch the fireworks. And I remember going over there a few times in the spring, because by then things had kind of settled down in the world somewhat. And that's kind of how it ended. They got convictions of everybody. There was appeals that went on after that, and some convictions were thrown out, but that was years later. So I think overall it was not just a success in a case, but a success for the Jacksonville office, which I think to some extent might have had at the time a little, I don't know if inferiority complex is the word, but definitely felt slighted by the bigger neighboring offices. And for Jacksonville, for the folks in Jacksonville, for the analysts and the team there to be on the headlines of a national news story on a case like this was really rewarding for me. And it's always nice to have a case where, I've always said this, and I know it maybe sounds a little shallow, but it's just money, right? I mean, it's money. Nobody's dead. Nobody died. Nobody was physically harmed. Yeah, some people went to jail, but no cases have happy endings. Not the kind of ending that case agents and people involved wake up with nightmares for years. We didn't have that here, so that was a positive.
I guess the word would be satisfying. Most white-collar crime cases have a very satisfying conclusion.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah. You wrap it up and it's done and it's over. It's not like a drug case where we arrest this kingpin, and within a month somebody stepped into his role, and it's just an ongoing battle. I think back to this. I mean, had McDonald's games started 3 weeks later or a month later, and the whole case was pushed so that the takedown would have been in September 21st and not August 21st, this would have had a completely different outcome. I'm not even sure we could have pulled it off in terms of a takedown the way we did. It wouldn't have mattered. It didn't matter on September 21st. That is the story of Operation Final Answer, the McDonald's monopoly fraud case from 2001 in little Jacksonville, Florida. It's great to be able to retell it. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have to go back and do a little homework, refresh my memory. Some things stand out, some things probably embellished, but it was fun.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to remember and share that with us. I do have questions.
Sure, please.
I wrote down little notes. It's only 2, but it's 2 now. Who knows if it will grow. But were any of the game pieces, the large major prizes, ever legitimately won?
I've wondered that, and the working theory is no. From the time Jerry Jacobson got involved. That said, and I've had occasion now to think a lot more about this case, and maybe somebody will chime in at some point or email me and tell me I'm wrong. I'm not sure that there was ever a complete reconciliation of winners from, wherever that list is, from McDonald's to everybody who was charged. I know there might have been people in our realm that we just never found or never got to. There was a piece, and it's in the TV show, that was donated to St. Jude's Hospital I want to say in Tennessee, I might be wrong. Early on, $1 million piece. There was a lot of media attention to that. It was an anonymous donation. We believe, and there's no evidence to the contrary, that was Jerry Jacobson had donated that because he, at that time, could not find a suitable recruiter and winner to place the piece. Or maybe he just had a good heart that day. I don't know.
I don't know.
I can't. Yeah.
I'm too cynical to believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other question, as agents, we put so much into working these cases. And you already mentioned the time that you were devoting, to it and not being home. And I'm sure that was the case with Rick Dent and Doug Matthews and all of the people that were involved. And so when a case goes down, especially one, that's going to be, pretty big, and it goes down, and that satisfaction that you normally would feel wasn't totally there because, there was this big looming case, 9/11 that kind of overshadowed it, rightly so, but overshadowed it. And I say all of that to ask you the question of how surprised were you when this whole thing was resurrected and, has become this huge thing now?
So I was surprised at how long it took to be resurrected. I was not surprised that it got resurrected. And when James Hernandez initially reached out to me, I think it was in early 2017, I was, and the FBI was very supportive and gave everybody authorization to talk about it, which was comforting and nice. I was more than happy to finally get back into it and tell somebody who was interested. I will say that James and Brian, in the early stages, were mostly interested in the whole FBI part of this, the investigation. They just had this insatiable curiosity about the squad and who had what role. And I would talk about healthcare fraud priorities, and they would ask more questions about it. I would think, who in the hell cares about this? I don't even care about it. And you're talking about a movie about this. As it progressed, they obviously got into some characters and hit gold with some of that, and the amount of work and research they put into it was just incredible, so impressive to me. But in terms of surprise, so I'm surprised it took so long. Where I'm really surprised is the interest now in the case from what near and far, and that there's an appreciation for it, and hopefully enough time has passed that the people who were hurt by it have healed, and that somehow, some way, we've been able to tell a story that is informative and entertaining.
And I do have to ask you about this. You just brought up another question. And again, I didn't watch the TV show because I'm too cheap to get HBO, but I did listen to the podcast. And one of the things that comes up over and over again, that some of the perpetrators, some of the participants, in a way, ended up being victims also. You mentioned the one time where the woman won $50,000 or $40,000. I forgot what it was, but she had to give the majority of it to Jerry and Jerry. And maybe she's left with 10,000, but then she still has to pay taxes on that.
Absolutely. And that, they do a good job of that in the show. Yeah, she was, of many of the winners, probably could use the money. She wasn't poverty stricken, but could put the money to good use, and that's exactly what happened. She got her first 50,000, and the deal. She in fact had to take out a second mortgage on her house to pay up the other. I think it was the other 10,000, because their deal was. These particularly Jerry Colombo. There was always this threat, this organized crime aura about him that, they're tied in with the Colombo crime family. And they frankly, I think they intimidated her into this, and she ended up having to not only take a second on her house, but pay that substantial part of the first winnings, back up the chain to them. And yeah, she was stuck with a tax bill. This was Gloria Brown. She pled guilty, couldn't afford a high-priced lawyer, ended up with a felony conviction as a result of it. There were other people, and I won't name names, who didn't need the money, who had resources and were able to hire high-priced lawyers that got them different deals. I mean, there was certainly some inequities in there, and
you had mentioned that there was an appeal.
Yeah.
I take it that was one of those situations.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Curtis Fallgetter, and this is where I kind of get out of my my range of expertise. But Curtis Fallgetter appealed George Chandler's conviction up to the circuit, Southeast U.S. Circuit, and through some technicalities in the way the conspiracy statute was worded and applied, that conviction was thrown out. And I can only imagine that was a costly legal fight. So, yeah. So yeah, certainly some victims in this. I mean, everybody involved had some degree of guilt. I mean, they knew somebody was wrong. I think in one case, the winner was told, well, this person won this, but they're going through a nasty divorce and they don't want the estranged wife to have access to these winnings. So you take it, you claim it, and give him the money. Well, okay, you don't know that Jerry Jacobson is stolen the piece from McDonald's and passed it through to a recruiter to you. But in that story, by your own admission, somebody's getting screwed. That wife,
right,
is getting cheated out of something.
Right. So you've agreed. You've agreed to a criminal act, a fraud.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
So, yeah, like every fraud, that's how it is.
Wow. Well, this was fascinating. And now, after all of this, almost 20 years later, now you're a TV star. Because that's how I found you. A couple of years ago, sometime in I guess it was 2017, 2018, there was a newspaper article about how there might be a movie or something made about this case. And I got the name of Rick Dent from the article, and I contacted him, and he let me know immediately that he wasn't interested. I assumed it was because he had signed some type of, deal or option and that he couldn't talk. And then when the show came out, I kept hearing about Doug Matthews and what a character he was. And I knew that I didn't want to have to go through FBI headquarters to get approved to talk to him, because I used to, work, for as a media rep for the FBI as a spokesperson. And I knew, what a hassle it was sometimes with public affairs. But then I saw you, Chris Graham, and that you were retired. And I said to myself, bingo. So I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to review this case with you. This has been fantastic.
It has. I've really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the time and the opportunity to lay out some more details of the story and the questions. And I'm sure I'm nowhere near as entertaining as Doug Matthews would have been, but sometimes you need the straight guy to.
Yeah, thank you.
Story. Yeah.
Hey, but we're not done yet, because I really like to give people an opportunity to, as I say, know what the FBI does and know who the FBI is. And so we're at the who the FBI is part. And so I got to ask you, when did you join the FBI and why did you join the FBI?
Great question. So I came in with a wave of accountants and lawyers in the late 1980s. There was a savings and loan crisis going on at the time, and the FBI was really focusing their recruiting on accountants and lawyers, mostly accountants. I had been working for a CPA firm for about 4 or 5 years. Very bored. Watched a bank robbery one time happen outside of our offices, and somehow everybody thought that was the FBI who caught the guy, and it was probably local detectives. But that sort of piqued my curiosity, and I just decided I really needed to and wanted to do something. It sounds cliche, do something more exciting, and it surely was, even more than I thought. I mean, I got in and I really expected to be spending a lot of time reviewing financial records and bank records. And yeah, there's some of that, but to be out and do interviews, or we call them interviews, some people call them interrogations, that more than met my expectaps.
And you were on SWAT too, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, did you ever imagine when you were a CPA that you would be on the SWAT team?
Oh yeah. I've recalled that a lot, and there were other other accountants on the SWAT team, and even at one point spent 51 days in Waco flying around on a helicopter during the tragic siege there. And I remember one day thinking, sitting in the back of the Bradley fighting vehicle in the freezing cold with an M16, thinking, wow, 4 years ago I was I was in an audit room crunching numbers, and how did it come to this? So yeah, definitely a big change, but a good one.
And then I know you were at headquarters, and then you ended back in Jacksonville. How did all of that happen?
Yeah, so I started in San Antonio and spent time 8-9 years there, and went up to DC for 4 years, and then really to get the white collar crime squad desk in Jacksonville was really a prize. I mean, everybody has things in their life that you think, oh my God, I was so lucky. For me, it was because we had family connections there, and it was just really a perfect fit. So I went down there in 2000, and obviously we had the McDonald's case. And then, like a lot of people, after 9/11, I migrated over to the terrorism side, spent time overseas. I opened and ran the Milan, Italy office for 3 years after 9/11 at a time where it was primarily a terrorism mission over there, and came back and always maintained a permanent residence, a home, a family, a connection with Jacksonville. So over the next 10, 15 years, even with deployments overseas or to headquarters for a couple of years, that was always home for me. And the time came in 2015 after running a joint terrorism task force for several years, which is, as you can imagine, and nonstop pressure. The time came in 2015 where I had the age, had the years, and it was time to retire and move into the corporate world again for a few years to see what that was like, or see what that's like. So that's my Reader's Digest version of Chris Graham.
So cool. And then, of course, Hollywood came calling. So
yeah, we'll see. I'm available. Any agents out there listening?
That's yeah. Well, you know what? You can. I always tell people, you can always write your book too.
Yeah. It's you know what it is. Again, it's the amount of work and the production that goes into and research into anything like that, whether it's writing a book, doing a podcast, doing a documentary. I mean, it's been a real eye opener for me to see how much work that is, how hard it is, how committed the people doing it have to be, and
how related it is to what we did during our career, because it's the same type of gathering of intelligence and information that we did with our cases.
I'm guessing you find that the retired folks are more willing and enthusiastic about telling these old stories, because you get to a point in life where you're on the other half of the timeline, and you start thinking about your experiences and your legacy and your memory. And certainly for FBI agents, a lot of that is cases like this, that when you're on the playing field, you're worried about, you're just worried about the next play and not doing a penalty. You get off the playing field and you have time to reflect and think back on that. Certainly been the case for me.
Yeah, and I know there are a number of current agents that listen to this podcast, and I'm telling you right now, keep notes.
Yeah.
Write a journal, because there are a number of agents that I reach out to that have been case agents with some fantastic cases, and they tell me, I don't remember anything. I didn't keep any records. I don't remember, and I have a subscription to a newspaper archive. So, I try to help them out and reminding them of, sentencings and how much time somebody got and names and things like that. And that's also always helpful. But, right now it's not a big deal, as you're working the case, you're just trying to do a great job. But later on, you're going to want to be able to remember these, have these memories.
I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. And press releases and indictments tell one side of the story, but some of the inside things that are happening at the time, little notes about, a funny joke or something, you forget all that. And that's really where
that's the story.
That's the story later on, because anybody can go back and, that takes it from just a compilation of publicly available information and FOI requests and things like that, and makes it into something personal that has meaning. So I agree with you, Jerry, and that would be my advice. I wish I had done more of it. Just the journal's a great idea. Just little notes here and there, memories, reflections of, how you felt at a certain time. If nothing else, someday you'll read them and reminisce, and that alone makes it worth it. But maybe even they have application outside of your immediate group.
During a number of these episodes, we have been able to dedicate them or do them in honor of different agents who have died in the line of duty. And I know that there was someone that you had worked with that you wanted to dedicate this particular episode to.
Yeah, I'd like to dedicate it to Special Agent Melissa Morrow, who passed recently due to illness sustained as part of her response to the attack on the Pentagon at 9/11. Melissa was somebody I worked with off and on over the years, and worked with her on some cases out of Kansas City, and she just was just a phenomenal beam of light and really a fighter right up to the end, and to learn of her loss of this fight was really sad.
Well, what I'll do is put a link to the FBI website, Hall of Honor summary. I'll put a link to that in this episode's show notes so everyone can get to know about Melissa Morrow and her ultimate dedication and sacrifice to the FBI.
Great. Thanks. Very good.
All right. At the very end of every episode, I like to give my guest the last word. So what would you like to say?
Oh boy. No, I just, thanks for the opportunity. I hope everybody enjoys going through this case. And to my earlier point, this was really a team effort where a lot of people from with different backgrounds, different skill sets, all really pulled together. And that is what makes being part of the FBI and the FBI in general special, I think. On behalf of everybody on this team who worked on this case, on behalf of them, I thank you for giving me as the spokesman the chance to talk about it.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerrywilliams.com, you'll find a photo of Chris Graham. There's a link to a tribute to Special Agent Melissa Morrow. There are newspaper articles from 2001 with details about the indictments for the McDonald's monopoly scam. There are links to trailers for each episode of the 6-part McMillion series and to the McMillions podcast. There's also an organizational chart from the case that will help you keep track of all of the players. I hope you enjoy the interview and that you share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. I would love it if you'd also check out the link for my books in your podcast app's description of this episode. My nonfiction FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, goes through 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And there's also my word search puzzle book and my Philadelphia FBI Corruption Squad series. All of my books are available wherever books are sold. Please consider leaving a review. Reviews help readers find good books. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.